It's clear that we can get to a net zero economy by 2050, and it's clear that there are many technologies, vitally important technologies, other than CCUS. There's renewable electricity, there's hydrogen, there's bioenergy. But we need CCUS to deal with the final bit of getting to net zero. We think it's about 10% of the answer. For instance, in cement, there is really no way to get to net zero except with CCUS. And in some other sectors of the economy, in some locations, it will be more economic than the other technologies. So we don't see it as a major part of how to get to net zero, and it does not allow us to keep consuming large quantities of fossil fuels forever into the future, but it has a really vital, though limited, role in getting us to net zero. What we need is projects in the next 5 years. We need people to really do significant scale projects which prove the technology, prove the high capture rates, and many of those will have to occur in clusters because we need the sharing of transport and storage facilities between many users in order to make the economics of transport and storage economic. So I think really driving forward the use of CCUS, in particular industrial clusters, is the crucial thing to prove a technology which does have a vital but limited role to play in getting us to net zero. CCUS has had a checkered past, in part because of good news. The fact is, 15 years ago, people thought we'd have to use CCUS on a large scale to decarbonise the power sector, but renewables have come down so much in price that the role of CCUS in power is now more limited. I think what we now have is a much clearer sense of where CCUS will be important. It will be important to have some element of direct air capture of carbon to give us some negative emissions. Combined with bioenergy, it can also provide us negative emissions, and it will have limited but still vital roles in the cement sector, in parts of the steel sector, and parts of the chemicals sector in particular. We have to get to net zero by mid-century to have any chance of limiting global warming to acceptable levels. We've talked in the past of the objective of limiting it to 1.5 degrees centigrade. As Alok Sharma said after COP26 in Glasgow, that objective, that desire is hanging by a thread. Frankly, it may be impossible. But let's realise every 0.1 degree above 1.5 degrees is a disaster in terms of climate change impacts across the world. So we have got to drive to net zero emissions by 2050, 2060 across the whole world, and we've got to drive emissions down fast in the next 10 years. In order to deliver net zero, we need clear government policies. And let's be clear about that. Individual companies can't deliver it unless there is the framework of strong policies such as bans on purchase of internal combustion engines beyond 2035, carbon prices, strong support for people to insulate their homes better, and nothing in the terms of net zero commitments by companies can make up for the lack of a clear government policy. But within clear government policies, there is a huge role for companies and financial institutions to commit to net zero targets and to drive their internal policies in pursuit of those, thinking clearly about the technologies that they should support and shouldn't support, and having a clear vision of how rapidly emissions in their particular sector of the economy should decline. I think to communicate the values of CCUS, one needs to get away from some of the past errors. There was a time in which parts of the fossil fuel industry were producing enormous figures for the scale of CCUS in the second half of the 21st century to justify large continued use of fossil fuels. And frankly, that polluted the well, as it were, in terms of public acceptance of CCUS. We've got to come back, and we've tried to do that in our ETC report, and say CCUS is not the main answer. And CCUS is not a route to allow us to produce large quantities of fossil fuels ever into the future, but it is essential in some specific sectors of the economy, in bits of chemicals, in bits of the cement industry. In parts of the steel industry, in some locations, it will be significantly cheaper than the alternative hydrogen route. And we need to convince them that we do need it in those sectors and that we can use it in a safe and responsible fashion, which certainly we in the ETC believe will be possible.